Pop pills! The movie that built the future and then made it miserable. Welcome to Blade Runner. There are movies that age. And then there's Blade Runner, a movie that walked into 1982, looked around and said, "You people are not ready for me. And also your lighting is embarrassing." This thing wasn't just ahead of its time, it was ahead of our time. And honestly, we're still trying to catch up. Because Blade Runner isn't just sci-fi, it's what happens when film noir, philosophy, industrial smog, corporate dread, existential depression, and one very, very tired Harrison Ford all get shoved into the same rainstorm. And somehow it becomes one of the most beautiful migraines ever filmed.
I know what percentage of me doesn't give a shit.
The movie before the movie. Alright, let's start here. Blade Runner did not arrive as a clean, sacred text film bros pretend it was born as. This movie came in fighting. The film was adapted from Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. But what ended up on screen was shaped heavily by Hampton Fraser, David Peoples, and Ridley Scott. And it changed a lot on the way. The movie's noir structure, world building, and philosophical ambiguity were not just in the book. It was not waiting to be filmed. They were forged in rewrites and collisions between different sensibilities. That matters because when people talk about Blade Runner like it dropped from heaven, fully formed, no. This thing was built by argument. It was built by people dragging different versions of the future into the same room and just seeing which one survives. That means Deckard isn't just some generic sci-fi detective. The whole movie is less like a clean adaptation and more like a hallucination that got a budget and a release date. So, already before cameras even roll, this movie is doing the most. The craziest early development fact, before this thing became the sacred neon depression brick we now know, it had a full-blown identity crisis. There were major fights over tone, clarity, and what kind of movie this even was. The studio wanted coherence. Scott wanted atmosphere. The writers wanted different versions of the same nightmare. That's why the final thing feels like multiple movies barely agreeing to share the same trench coat. And honestly, that's part of why it worked. It wants you off balance. And the first release, not the holy version people worship now. The theatrical cut had a Deckard voiceover, a happy ending, less ambiguity, and the studio basically trying to explain the movie to the audience like they were scared people would file a complaint because they were.
Oh shit, buddy, I gotta dig a little deeper. There's no Pepe Sylvia, you gotta be kidding me! I got boxes full of Pepe!
Negative test screenings pushed the film toward narration and a less bleak ending. Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott both disliked the voiceover. Scott later fought to remove it in the later cuts, while the 1992 director's cut and 2007 final cut restored more of the ambiguity, including the unicorn material's importance. So yeah, one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made was initially released with studio training wheels, which is like putting a governor on a flamethrower.
Anybody order fried sauerkraut?
Why the multiple cuts actually matter though. This is what makes Blade Runner extra insane as a piece of film history. You don't just watch the movie, you get to choose your theology. The theatrical cut is studio panic. The director's cut is myth repair. The final cut is Ridley Scott basically saying, okay, now you're seeing the one I wanted you to see in the first place. And depending on which version you saw first, you almost saw a different movie. That's not normal. That's not a fun collector's item thing. That's one of the reasons this movie became a religion for weirdos.
I guess I could wear one of my Hanukkah sweaters.
Annie, I didn't know you weren't, Christian.
Yep. One might even say I'm Jewish.
Segment 2. The set was a war zone in a rain machine. Now let's get into the fun part. The making of this movie was miserable. Not a little tense. Not creative differences. I mean, the kind of shoot where everyone looks like they need a nap, a cigarette, or a union rep. Sometimes all of them. Production was notoriously difficult, with long nights, weather problems, budget pressure, and tension between Ridley Scott and parts of the cast and crew, including Harrison Ford. The strain was real enough that it became part of the movie's texture. That exhaustion is all over Deckard. And that's one of my favorite parts of this movie's DNA. Deckard doesn't feel cool because Harrison Ford is doing movie star stuff. He feels burned out because the whole production looked like it was one step away from spontaneous human combustion. And then there's the visual side. Blade Runner didn't just use miniatures, it used them like black magic. Douglas Trumbull and the effects team built the city through layered practical effects. Miniatures, smoke, lighting, and optical works. Some imagery used in the Hades landscape was repurposed from earlier Trumbull work, which is one of those perfect old Hollywood wizardry facts that makes modern green screen laziness look even lazier. The movie's whole used furniture look, neon, grime, density, ad-saturated decay, became one of the most copied aesthetics in cinema, games, architecture, and basically every cyberpunk mood board ever since. That spinner? Iconic. That city? Iconic. The vibe of Capitalism Won and the weather lost? Double iconic. Harrison Ford? He's perfect. Here. Because he looks exactly like a man who has had enough of everybody's nonsense. Which, on this set, was apparently not much of a performance leap. This movie was forced to commit. Every frame had to be designed. Every layer had to count. Every light source had to justify itself. You couldn't just scream, "Fix it in post!" and let 300 exhausted VFX artists inherit your bad decisions.
I'm tired, boss.
That discipline matters, and you can see it in Blade Runner. Let's get into the part of Blade Runner that starts arguments in the parking lot. Gaff, Origami, the unicorn, and the question that has ruined perfectly good friendships. Is Deckard a replicant? Edward James Olmos built Gaff's city speak from multiple languages after taking Berlitz classes, and Gaff's origami figures were designed to comment on Deckard's inner life. Olmos has actually discussed city speak as a blend of languages and the origami as meaningful signals rather than random quirky cop business. That matters because Gaff isn't just lurking around being artsy and judgmental. He's basically the movie's weird little truth goblin. The unicorn is where the piece ends. The final cuts Unicorn Dream and Gaff's origami unicorn are the biggest clues Ridley Scott uses to support the view that Deckard is, in fact, a replicant. Scott has been explicit in that. In his reading, the unicorn connects Gaff's knowledge to Deckard's inner thoughts and memories. Harrison Ford has disagreed publicly, which is honestly very funny because even the people who made this movie can't fully agree on the guy whose face is on the poster. This movie has more identity debates than a film student after 2 whiskeys and a semester abroad.
You say no to me? No. Flip it. I say no.
The origami is not decoration. Gaff's little paper animals are not throwaway props. They track the emotional chess game. The chicken, the little man, the unicorn. That's not production garnish. That's the movie whispering in your ear while pretending it didn't say anything. Olmos has said his own view is that only a human can truly be a Blade Runner, which adds another layer to the Gaff-Deckard dynamic. So, even Gaff's existence in the story is part philosophical side-eye, part bureaucratic menace. In other words, Gaff is not there to help. Gaff is there to look at Deckard like, "You sure about you, buddy?" Roy Beatty, Tears in the Rain, and why this movie kicks you in the soul. Most sci-fi villains want power. Roy Beatty just wants more life, which frankly is a way better motive than most genre villains get after 11 writers and a color-correcting budget. Rutger Hauer specifically rewrote the Tears in the Rain speech the night before filming, cutting down the original lines and adding the now immortal, "All those moments will be lost in time like tears in the rain."
All those moments will be lost in time like tears in rain.
Multiple accounts from Hauer, Ridley Scott, and later retellings confirming that the monologue we remember is leaner, sadder, and more human because Hauer took a knife to the original opera talk. That is one of the greatest actor interventions in movie history. He looked at a script, saw a speech that sounded like a robot trying to win a poetry slam, and said, "No, we're dying pretty tonight." Deckard is exhausted, Tyrell is cold, the city is dead inside, and Roy, the artificial man, is the one who gives the movie its soul. That's not subtle. That is Ridley Scott taking your chest cavity apart with rain and monologue cadence. I have a personal side quest right here. I have one of Harrison Ford's blasters recreated for Blade Runner 2049. And if you know me, you already know I cannot let that slide by without bringing it up. The Blade Runner blaster looks futuristic, but it's actually built like a garage project from a guy who had access to a parts bin and zero supervision. At its core, this thing is a Charter Arms Bulldog 44 Special Revolver, which is already a chunky little revolver that looks like it means business. But then, they slapped on parts from a Steyr rifle receiver, added some metal shrouds, stretched the trigger guard, and basically said, what if a revolver went through a midlife crisis? And that just works. It's not sleek, it's not clean. It looks like it's been dropped, rebuilt, and carried by a guy who hasn't trusted anyone since 1979. This isn't a sci-fi gun. This is a gun from the future, where everything is slightly broken, including the people using it. That's why it feels believable, because it's actually a real firearm at its core. The upper section comes from a Steyr SL rifle receiver bolt housing, okay? So this is a bolt gun, but it fires like a revolver. Crazy. It's just, I've never seen another thing like this ever since. But that's what creates the rectangular sci-fi body, the layered mechanical silhouette, and the illusion of advanced technology. Without this piece, it just looks like a revolver. With it, it becomes Blade Runner. Here's the kit bash magic. The prop team added custom aluminum side plates to bulk this thing out, a reshaped trigger guard and actually a double trigger, which is the baddest part for me, various greeblies or random mechanical bits to sell the realism, as well as amber LEDs in later interpretations as well as the replicas. This is classic 1980s kit bashing. You take real parts, you stack them until your brain believes it. Most sci-fi guns look like they were designed on a computer. This one looks like it was built on a workbench by someone who didn't trust the future. It's sci-fi by way of pawn shop noir. Now, the multilingual king of origami, Gaff himself, Edward James Olmos.
Yeah, listen, I got your request for pop culture pills.
Gaff was one of the coolest, strangest, and most quietly menacing characters in the whole damn movie. And we've got some questions. When you first stepped into Blade Runner, did Gaff feel like a normal supporting role, or did you know right away he was carrying a lot of the movie's mystery on his back?
Now, when I started, this whole understanding with Blade Runner, I was a supporting role, and no one really knew that I was going to be able to understand it the way that I did, because I didn't at the time when I started. It kind of grew, but I did know that I was like an Uber driver for him in a spinner. But as time went on, especially after the scene with Captain Bryant and Decker, when I bring him in, and that really became where it all started, with the understanding of the cultural dynamic in respects of the origami.
The origami has launched about 1 billion arguments. When you were doing those moments, did you see them as clues, warnings, jokes, or Gaff basically messing with Deckard because he could?
I gotta tell you, that was strictly impulsive, trying to keep alive inside the scene, because they placed me in the back of the scene and I wasn't doing anything, and I didn't want to just allow it to me to be just sitting there like a tree. So I saw a piece of paper in an ashtray, and I just picked it up and I started playing with it, and at the end of the scene when he finished, I just looked at it and it looked like a chicken. I just, pluck, did a little chicken call there and put the chicken down, and Ridley heard it and came over and saw what I was doing. He brought the camera over and they augmented the chicken a little bit, and there it was. We had the first origami piece. And the second one, which was really kicked it in the high gear, was the stick man that I got in Leon's apartment when Deckard goes in to try to figure out what's going on with Leon and where he is. We ended up, I did the stick man while he was walking around. I wasn't doing anything again. I wasn't, looking for anything. It was his job, and I was there to give him the ride there. So I just made the little stick man, and I gave him a little hard on, which was something that really made the whole situation kind of funny.
You built City Speak out of multiple languages and made it feel lived in instead of gimmicky. What was your process there? And how much of that was you deciding Gaff needed to feel like he came from a bigger city and way bigger than one language?
When I talked to Ridley at the very beginning, first time I ever met him, I asked him if I could create this language, which is a combination of multiple languages, and this guy would be able to speak them all. And, because of the cultural dynamic. And it was 1980, and so basically we're still kind of figuring out what it was that Los Angeles was. And even though we had an incredible understanding of the migration of different cultures to that region of the world, so it wasn't far-fetched, but at the same time it hit like a ton of bricks. 30, 40 years later it became a reality. And City Speak is an integral part of language concepts in Los Angeles, 2026 especially.
You've had your own view on who and what Gaff is in relation to Deckard. From your perspective, was Gaff actually communicating to him by the end?
They launched 1 billion arguments, of course, was the unicorn. And that came by way of understanding that Ridley must have gotten hold of a great impulsive, creative genius moment and said, you know what, give me an origami piece. I didn't create it. I didn't create the origami. He did. And but he took it from the other pieces of origami that I made before this one. And he ended up making it become a reality, and made it become a situation where Deckard, without even knowing it, was not a Blade Runner. He was a replicant. And some people detested the idea, other people loved the idea. And but it caused a lot of controversy, which was great for the movie.
When did you realize Blade Runner had escaped being just a movie and became a permanent piece of culture?
And, we didn't know that Blade Runner would become a cultural phenomenon throughout the years, but it did. And because of the quality of the production, the quality of the story, it became what it is today. So, for as far as I'm concerned, it was a collaborational piece on part of everyone, from production design, which Ridley had total control of, to script, and of course allowing us to grow. He was very secure. Ridley was a very secure director, and secure meaning that he allowed growth around him, which is very essential for trying to make a collaborative type of work, which is what film is. So hope this helps. Thanks.
Thank you so much to the man who brought Gaff. There would be no origami. There would be so many things missing that made Blade Runner actually Blade Runner. Thank you so much. Final verdict. Blade Runner did not become immortal because it got everything neat and tidy. It became immortal because it stayed slippery. It lets you argue, it lets you drown in the vibe, it lets you sit in the rain and wonder if the future is just capitalism with better lighting and worse empathy. It's moody, it's messy, it's beautiful, it's pretentious in exactly the right ways. And when it hits, it's like a neon panic attack with a philosophy degree. Side effects. Viewing Blade Runner may cause sudden distrust of corporations with owls, dramatic staring into the rain, arguments about whether your coworker is a replicant, Zach, the urge to buy a trench coat you absolutely do not deserve, speaking like you're in a cigarette commercial from the apocalypse. If symptoms persist longer than forever, that's not a problem. That's just a baseline now. Pop pills! Your prescription for pop culture.